Right, hello everyone. So as we all know, China, South Korea, and Japan have really established themselves as hotbeds of opportunity for mobile and games growth. But unique strategies are definitely necessary to tackle these distinct markets. And each country has its own challenges. So today's roundtable features leaders from China, South Korea, and Japan to discuss the nuances of each market. Tomas, who's the EMEA director, regional director of developer relations from SponsorPay, is going to lead our discussion. So I'll have Tomas introduce the panelists from here, and everybody, please give a warm welcome for our panel and enjoy.
Thank you, Liz. So yeah, my name is Thomas, and I work for SponsorPay. And I want to thank you all for coming and joining us this afternoon. And with me, I have great bunch of guys who will be willing to share with you, some insights and strategies and answer questions with regards to this really exciting area that they all kind of have specialty in. And I have David, Jamie, and Charlie with me. So if you guys could just introduce yourself shortly and your company and what you're doing.
Sure. Is this mic on? Or perhaps I should use this one. Okay. My name is Charlie Moseley. I am creative director of Tap for Fun. We are the highest grossing iPhone developer and Android in China, and I've been in China for 9 years.
My name is Jaime, although it looks like Jamie. It's all right. I'm a director of DNA, representing DNA in the Singapore office, and DNA is a Japanese mobile gaming company.
Hi, my name is David Kim. I'm the CEO and founder of Animoca, based in Hong Kong. I'm not really here to represent Korea as much. I'm just happens to be Korean and know some things about Korea, but I guess I'm the de facto Korea guy here today.
Right.
And I've been in Asia for about 16, 17 years.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So developers see enormous opportunity in Asian markets, in Asian game markets and app markets. So can you give a general overview of dominant trends and developments you see evolving in China, South Korea, and Japan as opposed to Europe?
Let's see. So that's a kind of general question. Overall trends, in China at least, it's all online games. And obviously it's all freemium. So China kind of predates the Western world as far as popularity of freemium apps. And that's kind of due to, in large part, piracy in China, which is rampant. So it's been a very long time that game developers inside China have not been able to sell games at an upfront cost. So they kind of very early resorted to the online web browser version of in-app purchases. So China kind of has that history, and that's very much an ingrained part of Chinese game development, which is why you basically never see for-pay games see any kind of success inside China. And now you're kind of beginning to see the early stages of that in international markets worldwide. But I think that kind of has origins in China, so that's definitely one of the most unique, important factors about that market.
For Japan, Japan has always been, like, say, for about 3 years ago, a feature phone market, and all of the games were sort of like played via a web browser. And a lot of people, when they find out about this, they always ask me, how come it's only now where Japan's sort of shifting into smartphones? Well, that's because the feature phones of Japan were actually quite advanced, and a lot of the capabilities of the iPhone when it first came out was already being done by feature phones. So the adoption of smartphones was a little bit late. These browser games that happen in Japan, actually, if you look at it, they're actually pretty, almost like have a very native feel. But the trend's happening now. I mean, Japan's quickly shifting now into the smartphone, adopting smartphone actually quite rapidly. So that's one trend we're seeing now that's also, affecting a lot of the, game companies that used to be strong on feature phones, like us. And aside from that quick adoption, I mean, the want for a more native feel type of game is also, their appetite's also, that sort of appetite is also increasing. And we've seen a shift also in terms of game genre preference, where it used to be all RPG. Now, casual puzzle is also dominating the industry.
Well, Korea in general. Korea, I think, is largely seen as kind of the game leader. A lot of the games that are very popular in Japan and China are actually originated out of Korea. That's not ethnic pride talking. That's just.
I would say if I could
business
just
trends.
add one tiny thing there, just all areas of Korean culture seem to be popular in China. Games, TVs, shows, movies. So I can
We're
verify
extremely
that.
cool people, we Koreans. But the thing that I guess a trend that I can talk about that I think everybody probably knows, at least in the mobile gaming space, is that the biggest thing about trend is that it's just super fast. The business models of 6 months ago, I mean, Casual Connect in Hamburg last year, models were different. I mean, generally you got games that are doing well, that are failing, but as far as what is trending, it's different every 6 months. So it's just super, super fast. So I wouldn't think of trends as so much of a directional thing as much as kind of a speed thing for Asia in particular. And just one quick note. It may change, and there's a lot of companies that are focusing in Southeast Asia now, but until today, I would say when you're talking about Asia, you're talking about the China, Japan, Korea market. The CJK market is about 95% of Asia market. It is changing. There's a lot of companies that are focusing in Southeast Asia right now because the adoption of smartphones in like Indonesia, other parts of Asia are growing super fast, but still minuscule compared to these three countries.
Not to mention the 250 million people in Indonesia, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So it seems that Asia is generally as a holy grail seen by developers that developing mobile games, and it seems that hard facts are proving this. If we take and continue in Japan, the app revenues already surpassed US, and if we take any downloaded game in Japan, it generates 3 times more revenues on iOS store, and about 6 times the average norm on Android. And at the end, it's also the first game that generated 1 billion in sales comes from the region, from Japan. So, and based on that, many people also claim that Asia is ahead of the game, and companies like Gang Ho Entertainment are raising crazy amounts of money based on historically high valuations. It's also the most lucrative mobile games market in the world. 41% of total revenues on app stores in December 2013 came from Asia, where 31 in America and just 23 in Europe. So do you share those views that Asia is taking over in mobile gaming industry?
Yes, I do. I really do believe that. I think that I can see why the Asian market is so big now, because I really see a difference in users. So just my friends, for example, people in China have no problem spending a lot of money on online games. Whereas in my home country, in America, there's kind of a stigma associated with it. If you tell people that you spend like $100 in Candy Crush, they'll probably look at you like you're crazy or something. People probably just wouldn't talk about that because it's not a socially acceptable kind of thing. And in Asia, that's completely different. So I really see the future being more growth in Asia, and I feel like it's very dramatic to say that Asia is taking over or something like this, because I don't think it's quite to that extent. But I do believe that the Asian market will continue to be the biggest, and I see it continuing to grow. And I see most of the growth of the next few years happening in China, because you're probably getting close to saturation in Japan and Korea, because these countries are, gaming is so big there. But China has, hundreds of millions of people, which are still open to be acquired. So I think that's where a lot of the growth is going to be over the next couple of years.
Well, I support that, and as you said, Japan is the video gaming industry has a long history, and it's intrinsic. So it's just really natural that the adoption rate of games on mobile, especially now with the current devices, is just, it's just going to really take off. And aside from just adoption, I mean, even the paying power, it's just very normal for someone in Japan to pay for something to satisfy him inside the game. There's no hesitation, there's no second thoughts. Whereas probably compared to Western countries, there's always that second thought: should I buy this, or probably save it till when I really can't. But for them, it's really automatic. When this new game called Dragon Quest Monsters just came out recently in Japan, on the first day itself, I mean, people were paying as much as like $200 on the first day because they were very, very sort of excited about this new IP that came out in the game. So it's very natural for them. So that propensity to pay, the high-paying user rate, definitely a market that's that's worth investing in.
I suppose it's always dangerous to overgeneralize cultural dispositions of, but overall, it is, along with what these two gentlemen have said, the general culture is that game is always accepted, and the adoption rate in Asia tends to be much quicker. And it is also much more. It just turns on a dime. So if there's something cool, if there's a new game that comes out, it just goes, and things happen super quick out there. So all of that kind of put together, I think, makes for a very it's a very prolific industry over there. But does it necessarily need to dominate? I guess one can make an argument for or against. But if you're spending time in Asia, you definitely see how aggressive it's growing locally.
If I could just add one little tiny thing. I always notice all the time in China, everywhere you go, you see people playing games on their phones. So if you're on the subway or if you're walking around the street, like, you will definitely see people playing games everywhere you go. I don't notice that in the States like quite as much.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there are a lot of gamers, but you don't see it kind of everywhere in your face in society to the same extent.
I'm sure this is going to come up at some point, but the whole thing about in games in Korea, especially right now, Kakao basically have it so that you mix social and mobile gaming together. And not only is it now mobile gaming, but it's super competitive amongst friends. And so, if Charlie beats me one day, on my lunch hour, I'm actually going to be playing to top him. And this is a very, very common thing in Korea and actually in Hong Kong and other places that I've seen in Asia. So definitely.
Thanks. So let's talk about app stores. And if we only take iOS App Store and Google Play, the situation is already different in Asia compared to US and Europe. In Asia, it is equally distributed in revenues between iOS and Google Play, where in Western world, the lion's share of revenues are generated on iOS. So how does it translate for developer who wants to enter those markets? And do you have any best practices you want to or you could share here with the audience?
So just to tell a really quick personal story, Tapper Fund was founded in 2011, and me and the founders of the company are really big fans of Steve Jobs and kind of the Apple ecosystem. So we were just on iOS for almost 3 years. And it wasn't until 2013 that we actually ported some of our games to Android. And we got into Google Play and Amazon and a bunch of different platforms for that. And what we learned in 2013, kind of one of the biggest lessons, was we probably should have gotten on Android much earlier. Despite our personal preference for iOS and for the Apple ecosystem, Google Play is insanely profitable, and it's just becoming more profitable. So as far as best practices, I mean, I really see Google Play just kind of taking over iOS in China, at least. I can't really speak for Japan or Korea. Those are not my areas of expertise. But in China, there are hardware manufacturers that make fully featured Android phones for less than $100. So really, really low cost, which is a major factor in China, where you have average income of well under 1,000 euros a month. So Google Play, super important. Even more important in Asia, I think, than it is in the Western world. So yeah, best practice. It sounds kind of straightforward, but get on Android.
You stole my line. That's all. That's basically what it is. Definitely have an Android port. I mean, in Japan, it's just quite natural. In Android, you can actually monetize not just on Google Play, but also through independent app stores where you don't have to pay through Google Play. And that was one thing that was quite natural also in Japan, because a lot of the 99% of feature phone payments came through mobile operator billing, which translated actually also into the Android phone. But I mean, like I said, Japan's a little bit. Japan actually has a higher iOS sort of user ratio compared to Korea and China, and that's just because there's also sort of that status quo that the iPhone brings with it, which is sort of also part of the Japanese culture of wanting in getting that phone. It's a fashion statement, yeah, but definitely be on Android.
If actually, again, I get onto so many dangerous lines when I talk about cultures, but one of the reasons why it's speculated that Android doesn't take off is obviously the biggest device manufacturer affiliated with Android is Samsung, which is very Korean, and there is believe it or not, still to this day, a lot of cultural and actually business animosities amongst between the two countries. So I think that's one of the reasons why actually Android doesn't take off as much in Japan. But there's no doubt that, and we were actually discussing this a little bit earlier, there's no doubt that actually for the greater the markets, the world on the whole is leaning towards Android, and all the growth rates would suggest that Android will be the dominant platform, at least in terms of overall reach. And I think U.S. and Japan to this day are probably the only exception to that case today. But even in the U.S., Android is growing by percentage. There's no doubt in Korea, as Android, it's a market where iOS has shrunk from, I think they had 60% in 2011, and it's down to something like 20% and below now in 2013. So. Yeah, there's no doubt that the adoption of Android is the trend. That's the train that one wants to ride if you want to get onto on a profitable train anyway.
Also, one real quick thing I want to add is if you're a game developer and you're targeting China, it's not quite as simple as just get your app into Google Play, because I assume that Korea and Japan are the same way. In China, you have dozens and dozens of different platforms that are Android based, and you have to know which ones are the really lucrative ones. So if you get your app in Google Play in the Chinese App Store, for example, you might not have that much success because only a small minority of the Android market in China actually uses Google Play to get their games. They use China-specific platforms. So one of the big challenges is identifying what these channels are and then getting on the really lucrative ones that work for the type of game that you make.
Charlie, just on China, because obviously China, just the size of the market necessitates attention. You want to talk a little bit about kind of how different that market is in terms of, because of piracy, because of various other reasons, the way of ranking and how you spend money in marketing in China is drastically different than even Japan or Korea or anywhere else in the world for that matter, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that for just an hour alone, I think. I mean, just ranking in China, first of all, is like mostly fraudulent. The vast majority of Chinese game developers, in Chinese it's called shuabang, and it means like gaming the ranking, basically. And they spend money to illegitimately acquire a high ranking to get attention in the App Store. A lot of developers do this. I guess, obviously the topic of the last 2 weeks has been Flappy Bird. Everybody's probably heard this 100 times a day. A lot of people have been, talking about how did they achieve that rank that was so lucrative and so valuable and gave them so much exposure. Did they acquire it legitimately or not? Because there's kind of this stigma that Asian game developers, tend to like kind of cheat their way to get up the ranking. And that's certainly a phenomenon inside China.
Thank you. So let's talk about social interaction and social part of games, as it seems key for mobile game and developers. And since mobile games are most often free and freemium comes out of Asia, so most games are free and it's designed to spread quickly across social networks, and it is integrated into their mechanics of the game. So you also need to leverage the social platforms like Kakao, like Line, and WeChat in China. And why is social gaming so prominent in this region? And what are the benefits and drawbacks of this? And also, are there any differences between each of your respective markets you're touching today? And what would be the suggestions for developers?
So first of all, for the type of games that we make are online multiplayer strategy games. So social connections between players are hugely important. You really can't overstate the importance of that. And what I mean by that is if we have a player who's connected to people that person knows in real life, friends or family, that player is far more valuable than someone who doesn't have those connections. So you want to make those social connections happen inside the game. Normally, Facebook and Twitter are your go-to social networks because everyone here has a Facebook account, I'm sure. That situation is totally different inside China. No one has a Facebook account because Facebook is literally blocked inside China. So is Twitter. So those two social networks are worthless inside China. They're completely dead. So there are other social networks that are specific to China, which everyone has an account on, just like we do with Facebook. And so kind of right now, the social network is WeChat, which is kind of like WhatsApp. So that's a really big app, or like Kakao in Korea. So there's WeChat and there's Weibo, which is basically a Twitter clone. So these are like the two big social networks. So if you make a freemium app and you market it for China, you definitely want to include these two things because these are the social networks that everybody is on. And obviously in our games we have Facebook and Twitter also because we're not focused just on the Chinese market. But for China really there's only two really important ones, Weibo and WeChat.
DNA actually started in as a social network. We have a platform called Mobage, and that actually started just as a plain social network. And it was only a year after we launched that social network that we started offering games. When we offered games on top of that social network, I mean, company revenues just quadrupled. I mean, we were having games that were generating north of $20 million a month when we started to open it on top of the social network. And I guess it was the same thing, that sort of element that the social network contribute into why actually it propelled that sort of revenue was the social networks in Japan are different from social like Facebook, for example. Facebook we consider to be a real social network, whereas the Japanese social networks, at least from Mobage's point of view, was a avatar-driven, non-personal, purely just a game social network. So a lot of the stuff that was shared or posted on Mobage weren't actually personal stuff. It was more about games. You didn't see any pictures of friends. Everything was just really avatar-based. And that sort of anonymity actually helped the Japanese consumer feel more free into sharing and acquiring friends inside the game, which he would challenge and play with, because that was very important for the Japanese. And so the virality of that dynamic actually really increased ARPU, increased DAU, and the rest is history. So the social network actually did play an important part of it.
Getting a little bit into the history of social games, as well as also this whole freemium model, which arguably a lot of people point to Korea as where this concept actually started, the earlier versions of Nexon's games and such. The way that it is as a country in Korea, everything is very, very viral. The entire country seems to be built that way. And if something trends very quickly in Korea. So it's not unusual. So it's not surprising that Kakao became not. It wasn't a distribution point by 2012. It was a platform on its own. And actually, Line, which is the dominant social network in Japan right now, is actually a subsidiary of a Korean company called NHN, as well. And the way that the society works there is if like dramas, like K-pop, for those of who you may be familiar with, if something gets popular, it's done in a day, a week, super quick. And so now in Korea, if top 20 games are all Kakao platformed, because the social aspect of it, of the competition, is absolute necessity now. You can't really do it without having a leaderboard that you can compare with your friends and such, and being able to gift items, being able to share stuff. So it's
it sounds like,
necessary.
if I could just add one thing, it sounds kind of similar in China right now with QQ. So QQ is like was the dominant kind of social network, or the biggest internet company in China. And they are just like bulldozing all other game developers in China right now, because they have this, like 800 million person network. And any game which they pick up, they can just broadcast to hundreds of millions of people. And ordinary Chinese game developers have no chance competing against that. Is that what it's like with Kakao right now?
In Korea right now, Kakao is about the only company in Korea where you'll have CEOs of major companies wait in a lobby. And they do that almost on purpose. They want to have it so that everybody competes for the slots that they have for distribution, because as soon as it's on, it's making money. And we're talking, crazy sums of money immediately. So
we actually, Tapper Fun, we made special versions of 2 of our games just for Kakao. And we had to rename the game just for Kakao. We had to change the icon.
for the Korean market?
For the Korean market, of course, yeah. We had to go through a lot of effort just for Kakao, but that's how lucrative it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
a lot of people are doing that.
Let's talk about partnerships. If we take China, for example, some developers are finding that forming partnerships with locally established companies seem to be very beneficial, and then how important is to secure a partnership with local partner when you're launching the game and when you're acquiring users, and especially navigating Chinese bureaucracy on one hand, and is it somehow different in Korea or Japan?
So first of all, I'll say I've been in China for 9 years now, and I'm fluent in Chinese, and I have a lot of connections inside China. I would probably never try to do this by myself. And I suggest you do not try to do it by yourself, because it's an absolute minefield for anyone who's non-Chinese. So I think the best thing you can do is to find a partner in China to cooperate with. And it's not that difficult to do. This is kind of a pitch alert here, but Tapper Fund is also, we're a publisher as well as a developer. And there are a lot of companies like us inside China who are looking for foreign developers to cooperate with. I spoke at a conference in Berlin just a few months ago and met a game developer, and he's already come to China, and we're already kind of working together. So I strongly suggest you guys find people to cooperate with inside China, because their knowledge and experience is something that you will never really be able to get, because China is just really tough to figure out. I mean, in general. But if you're trying to develop a game, or if you're trying to approach the Chinese market, it's really, really difficult to figure out what's going on if you do not have a local partner or some boots on the ground.
In Japan, you don't. There are you don't have to be afraid of those non-best practices as in China. It's more actually of a cultural barrier that you have in the Japanese market, because a lot of people still get shocked on how different the Japanese culture is and what their preferences are. I think it was this Demos report just last month which showed that the preference of Japanese the top 300 downloads in Japan is still 70% all local. So that alone just shows you that in terms of preference, they all want local games. 3 things as DNA, we always tell our developers there are three things that you always have to take care of when you want to enter the Japanese market. That's art, your game system, and the IP. So those three magic sort of, well, it's a guideline, but three magic ingredients that you have to sort of take care of. Japan preference is a different kind of art style compared to China and Korea. The monetization design, the game system, in terms of, I'm sure you guys have, or if you haven't, the gacha fusion mechanic is quite unique in the Japanese market, and there's a proper way of designing that. And of course, right now we see a lot of IP-driven successes in Japan as well, and the types of IP that are successful in Japan are just completely different from what you find in the West. So you have to know the balance of these three things when you enter the Japanese market, and the best way to actually do that and the quickest way is to partner with someone local.
I have a quick question. Are there many examples of foreign developers achieving huge success in Japan? Because I just know so many people who've tried to get into Japan and just been completely smacked around. Are there any examples of, I'm just curious, foreign developers like who've made it big in Japan?
Well, if you have Clash of Clans, which is, big in Japan, and a company we all don't know, King. But Candy Crush Saga is also sort of big in Japan, but those actually also
So
came
the
with the price,
big
right?
guys who've taken every
Yeah.
country.
Well, the success of Supercell was through a partnership with Gung Ho, who eventually acquired them. I mean, not acquired, but invested heavily on them. That happened. I even know the person that actually sort of started that sort of relationship, and that was just a small talk between Supercell and Gung Ho, where they said, "Why don't we, you cross promote my game in your country, and I'll cross promote your game in my country." And when they started to offer the Clash of Clans characters inside Puzzles and Dragons, that really propelled Clash of Clans into the top ranking charts instantly. So that just really shows what kind of strong partnerships can do inside the Japanese market. Whereas for King, I mean, they just spend really loads, and they have a TV commercial now, which I'm sure everyone has seen in Japan. So they're one of the first sort of Western developers that actually launched their own TV commercial in Japan using local actors and local personalities. And TV advertising works for games, believe it or not, in the Japanese market. It's a must thing to do for any big developer.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that, the Clash of Clans part.
Yeah. In Korea, even more so than Japan, actually, it's not categorically closed off to foreigners at all. Actually, they're very welcome. But I can't think of, including Candy Crush, I can't think of all these foreign games that are big elsewhere. They will do okay in Korea. They'll rank briefly, but they'll eventually be outflanked by a local guy that'll do it a little bit better with more social interaction and is more aggressively or locally marketed. So in Korea, partnerships are tough only because it is, it's a very Koreans are very proud of their games, and they feel that they know how to do games better than anybody, rightly or wrongly, and they will. So they can share, they can do some distribution, and there's talks of it. But I would say that Korea's more than even Japan and China is a difficult market to penetrate. Actually, China's probably the most difficult market to penetrate because it's a totally different system. But Korea, just by the level of sophistication of the games and how the game designs are just so catered towards the Korean audience, very few foreign developers can really get that. With all that said, something that I want to add on the China market, I've been based in Hong Kong for 16 years now, and even I don't try to do China. Hong Kong Chinese people don't try to do China. It is very, very different. And one thing that I guess we should caution, and I do agree that there's really no way for you to do this without partnerships, but you got to be very, very careful with partnerships, because I know of, this isn't a scientific number, but out of 50, 49 will just go nowhere.
Right, that's totally true. I gave a presentation in Berlin a few months ago, and I had a little video of, I was telling about the Chinese market and what it's like for foreigners coming into the market. And I had like a 30-second clip of Indiana Jones. And I think of it kind of like that. Indiana Jones goes into the temple, and he's looking for like the golden head. And there's like arrows coming out of the wall, and like the ball like chases him around. And that's kind of what it's like. It's like there are just things that are trying to get you like the entire time. So the reward is really great, but the risk is also really great.
Yeah, and I'm obviously being half joking, but they love to take white people's money. Garrett.
They also love white people's games in general, I'd say. A lot of Chinese game developers are really, really keen on cooperating with overseas game developers because a lot of Chinese developers want to have success overseas. You know, I mean, everyone's talking about how the Asian market's growing so much, but non-Asian countries are still very lucrative, and a lot of Chinese companies really want to get into that. And it can be as difficult for Chinese game developers to find success in America as the opposite is. You know, everyone's trying to get into China, and they're like, how does this work? Right now in China, there's tons of people who say, how do I get into America, or how do I get into Europe? And they don't know how to do that. You know, they're traditionally not really great at that. And so for them, you know, the best way for them to achieve that kind of success is to find, you know, people to cooperate and collaborate with in the Western Hemisphere. So Chinese people, I think, are just as interested in cooperating with you.
But you never know. The Chinese people actually might already have your game. So, so I speak actually with developers all the time, and you know, when they pitch to me their game, for example, their game's already published, they say, "Oh, we've got 1 million downloads already. We've got 800,000 downloads already. Oh, wow, it's cool. Which country are you strong in? Oh, it's all from China. So how did it go there? Oh, it was ripped somewhere and was offered in some, you know, some portal in China. So
yeah, the challenge is for Chinese game developers is to develop games that are interesting to overseas audiences. You know, that's kind of the big thing, and that's what's been so unique about Tap for Fun. I think, you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, our numbers, like our DAU and things like that. But to me, like, the really interesting thing is that there's this cultural barrier which has prevented Chinese game developers from achieving any kind of success overseas. And there are really just a handful of game developers in the entire country of China that have overcome those cultural hurdles to become successful overseas.
Thank you, guys. So far, the biggest takeaways, I think, for the audience are get on Android, leverage the social platforms and social gameplay, as well as form a local strong partnership with the companies locally, especially in China. So I would also like to ask some specific questions, each of you, in relations to what you do and your companies. So David, we'll start from you. So one big headline for Animoca last year was getting a strategic investment from 4Game, which is one of China's biggest mobile and web game development companies. So could you tell us a little bit more about this, and then how that furthers Animoca's footprint and business?
Well, that is actually, that's kind of piggybacking off of what we've been discussing all along, which is even being based in Hong Kong. Although, just a backdrop on Animoca, I mean, we're about 60% US, but I'm sorry, 40% US, 40% Asia, and the rest in Europe. So we're not necessarily Asia-based. We're headquartered there, but we're not necessarily focused on Asia per se. But one big missing gap in all of that was, ironically, China. And a lot of people try to go to China via Hong Kong, and it's a nice airport, so you can get there through Hong Kong. But as far as business is concerned, Hong Kong Chinese don't. They have a little bit of an advantage compared to most people sitting around here. But 4Game's investment was important in that was our segue into China. And so now, for us to actually try to, because we know how to rank effectively on iOS, on Android, in most markets. China, no clue. Because you know, a lot of it is bots, a lot of it is actually manipulated, and the manipulation is something that anybody outside of China cannot do. So that's part of the reason why we partnered up with 4Game. But similar to what Charlie was saying earlier, 4Game which is arguably one of the most successful web game companies in China, also are dying to go overseas. We do have very broad distribution at Animoca. So for their initial mobile games that they want to throw overseas, they want to do it through us. So it is very much where kind of going both ways in terms of distribution. And Charlie made, I think, a very good point that not just China, but Japanese and Korean game developers. Korean developers, if you guys call any Korean developers today and say, hey, we'd like to distribute game, they'll be here tomorrow, if they have the money. But they're very anxious to come out and develop overseas. They just don't know how to go about doing it. So, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Jamie, the mobile service that you were mentioning before has 30 million customers and mainly kind of playing them on feature phones and also coming from US, mainland China, Taiwan, and Japan. Do you see any differences between those regions? And are you noticing anything? And what are the particularities of each of the market, if you see any?
Of course, there's a difference. We're talking about Asia. So we set up Mobage in Korea. We set up Mobage in China. And it took a while for us to sort of, and we still are learning a lot from each of those markets because it's really very different. Even you all think that it's probably all just Asia. Things that work in Japan really don't work at all in Korea and in China. I could spend hours here just detailing those differences, but we're slowly getting there and finding out the right formula. We recently, I think in November, we launched a NBA game in China, and that actually now did really well. It was sort of in the top grossing now until today, ranking about probably fluctuating in between 10 and 20 top grossing, and it shows that we sort of got it right. So all that knowledge of how to do the type of monetization, the type of social interactions that the Chinese expect inside the game, and of course you slap a really big IP like NBA, which is in China, NBA property is really big. It's a magic formula for how to sort of getting success in these markets where we're in. So hopefully, we'll also have another success, let's say, in the Korean market, but we got one in China.
Thank you. Charlie, so Tap for Fun is a very good example of company which established themselves in both territories, in West and East. So you as living in China, I think you already shared few examples and few insights, but do you have any advice for companies and developers that wish to enter this cherry but still lucrative market and establish themselves there, and how they should take into account the local culture and other barriers and kind of overcome them?
Right, so there's many things to do. I'm not really sure where to start. I think the best thing you can do if you're interested in coming to, working in China or developing or publishing your game in China or something like that, find me after this speech and I'll get your business card and email you, and we can get into more, detailed stuff. But in general, find a partner in China is the most important thing. As David said, it can be really risky, but before you get to the risk stage, you can already collect a lot of valuable information on, how the market works, what kind of games, really work for China. I've met a lot of people at conferences like these who are interested in publishing their game in China, and in some cases they're just not games that are really compatible for the Chinese market because the tastes are a little bit different. So I think you can kind of dip your toe in and kind of get a feel for how compatible your company or your product is for China with no risk at all, really. So I think that's a good way to go. But yeah, like I said, there's so much to say. I mean, if you want to get into China, I mean, there are many things that you can do, many things that are good for you to do. One good thing I realize, most people might not have an opportunity to do this. Go to China and, maybe take a subway ride, and you can see probably at least 50 people playing games. And, you can see that they play different kinds of games, and they, play them in different ways too. And I guess the way they play it is kind of all the time. in China. It's kind of a never-ending thing. So yeah, I would say if you're interested in publishing a game in China, or if you have any specific questions, it might be best just to find me or find someone else in China and just get in touch and communicate.
Just one thing that I want to actually throw out there, and I'm pretty sure that the other two panels would agree, is that if anybody that you talk to, when you're talking about partners for China, Korea, Japan, and if anybody suggests that they can kind of cover all of Asia for you, take a step back, because nobody knows all the markets there that well.
Yeah, I think even just from the three of us just speaking before this, you know, we'll get asked a question and we'll kind of throw our piece in, and then we'll always add, you know, I'll always add, I'm not sure about, you know, Korea and Japan, and these guys will add, well, I'm not sure about China.
Yeah.
So, I mean, although we're very credentialed and experienced in our respective, you know, regions, I think we are all very aware of the differences between these three countries and how significant they are, and how much, you know, probably none of us has a totally comprehensive look of all of Asia, because it's just such a big picture.
Then you have Southeast Asia, which no one is actually taking notice of. But
Well,
that's a
yeah,
totally
right now-
different
right-
ball game altogether.
Yeah, nobody probably notices it here, but right now, so WeChat, Kakao, Line, the meta platforms, as I call them, these guys are right now all competing for Southeast China because they pretty much have their own market. They know that they can't dominate their competitors' market. So right now, the next battleground is Southeast Asia.
And Southeast Asia isn't just, you know,
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
a-
all the same
yeah,
again, right? So
different
you've got,
kettle of worms.
you know, you've got a fragmented, very, very fragmented piece of region there, where even though that they're next to each other, Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, all those have all their own respective localization problems. So welcome to the headache that we're in.
Thank you so much. Sounds really exciting. So, you know, personally and on behalf of Sponsor Pay, I would like to thank you for coming here and sharing here with us all the insights and strategies and tips. And, you know, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. And we still have a few minutes of time for your questions. So.
I have one, can you hear me? Sorry, I have one question following on from that last comment about Southeast Asia. I mean, clearly one of the things that emerged from the talk is that South Korea, China, and Japan are all very tough markets to get into. Which of the Southeast, and again, like following on from Charlie, your point that you always make that exception, I don't know about the other markets, but just as a matter of interest, what other territories in Asia do you think are the most interesting and perhaps, you know, the most accessible for foreign developers?
Okay, so I'm not an expert on Southeast Asia. We've actually gotten into a number of those markets. We've tried, we're in Thailand, Vietnam. Those have been the two most lucrative ones for us. But it's hard to say, which are the two biggest ones in Southeast Asia? Those are the two ones that I actually know about, that I've seen data on, you know? So I know that those are growing very fast. The numbers are far lower than in these three Asian countries. So acquisition costs are dirt cheap there. LTV is also really low there, but they're growing. So I guess the prospect is that, you know, the door's open to go in there and establish yourself, right, for the next maybe 5 years of growth. And that's kind of the prospect. That's kind of the exciting thing. I think that right now there's not a huge amount of value associated with those countries, especially in comparison to, you know, Korea, Japan, and China, which are like gold mines. You know, there's so much money to be made in these three countries. So by comparison, Southeast Asia is very small. We have an overseas partner in the United States who has a major IP, super huge. And we have been in negotiations to develop a game using this IP. And kind of in early stages of talking about this, they said, oh yeah, you can have all of Asia without Japan. And that was kind of like a real big blow for us. And we're like, well, that's like half of Asia just like off the table there, you know? So Southeast Asia is it's scrappy, you know, compared to these three other Asian countries. But the ones that I know about are Thailand and Vietnam, and those are growing very fast.
Yeah, I would say easiest, just logistically, Singapore is easy because it's English speaking. Malaysia's pretty easy because they're mostly English speaking. So they're going to be a little bit easier to at least get a foothold in and at least get your people out there and start figuring things out. Philippines, yeah, but generally, right now, if you were to, unless you've got a pretty deep pocketbooks, you know, you're going to be spending a lot to learn about a market with not as much to give back, at least in the near foreseeable future. Longer term, no doubt, all the countries, all the CJK countries are companies in those regions are all looking to Southeast Asia because that's the next growth market, but that's not today yet.
Yeah, I mean, Southeast Asia for us is like the Middle East. We're kind of experimenting with that too. Yeah, so we're just like, we don't really
Americans.
know, we don't know how fast this is going to grow, but let's try it out and kind of see what happens. And we're kind of like experimenting in these places.
So, I mean, for Southeast Asia, just put it in your heads. I mean, you're not going to monetize. You'll get lots of downloads, but the paying user rate there is like close to, negligible. So if you have an ad-based model for your game, then maybe, you've got 250 million people in Indonesia, 100 million people in the Philippines, 80 million people in Vietnam. Those are huge numbers. And these are like the adoption rate for smartphones in these markets are really, really, really fast, faster than anywhere else in the world, right? So just keep in mind, it's not a gold mine in terms of monetization, but something you can still sort of take advantage of what's there. One thing that no one's actually mentioned in this discussion, actually, which we should all pay attention to, is actually Taiwan. Taiwan actually, has some decent revenue. You can hit the decent revenues with your game if you hit the top ranking charts in Taiwan. They've got high spending power, but of course, I think the flavor and taste again of Taiwan is half and half. Half of that is Western U.S. taste. Another half of that is also is Chinese. So, but I hear and don't quote me on this, but the top grossing game there could generate about $3-4 million a month, which is decent money for me if I earn that
for
money.
you personally.
Yeah.
All right, that's unfortunately all the time we had today. So thanks again, guys, for joining us, and thanks for the panelists.